Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 548 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our sixth book just came out. It's called I'm So Beautiful, It's Ridiculous: Unleashing and Promoting Strength, Self-Worth, and Real Sisterhood. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, the Timothy Piazza hazing case from Beta Theta Pi at Penn State, that has to be one of those landmark hazing cases back in 2017 that I truly hope we in the fraternity and sorority community will never, ever forget. I was recently speaking 2 weeks ago at Penn State on hazing prevention with a different chapter, of course, and I stopped in front of the Beta Theta Pi house that is still there on campus. It still has the Beta Theta Pi letters on the outside of the house. And I just stopped in my tracks and I just looked at the house and I paused for a moment just to reflect on how far we've come since then in 2017. And today we now have a federal hazing prevention law. It's called the Stop Campus Hazing Act that was signed into law back in December of 2024. My research was just published on the early warning signs of hazing a couple of days ago on ProQuest, so go and read it. And it feels like we're making some progress. But then, just when I feel like we're making some progress, then last week we just had the hazing death of Caleb Wilson at Southern University with Omega Psi Phi fraternity. So we're right back to the same activities that have been recurring with hazing deaths happening every single year since 1958. When is that going to stop? That is the million-dollar question that I have right now. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Timothy Piazza case and just some other legal cases that I think certainly pertain to all of the college students who are listening today. So let's talk a little bit about our next guest. He's got a book out there, and it's called Unequal Justice: The Search for Truth to Balance the Scales. And it details the author, his name is James M. Porfido. It details his 35-year career in law. He is a certified criminal trial attorney since 1995 by the Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey. And he goes all the way to him being a TV legal analyst on cases in the national media to being a law professor. So James will take you on this journey and the path of his career in this incredible book. Go and pick it up. It's called Unequal Justice. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mike. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, listen, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. You've got a great legal mind, and there's so many cases that have implications to today's college students. So I think you're a fabulous guest for this show. And I like to talk about people and kind of where it all started in terms of their undergraduate experience. And for you, you decided on Seton Hall University in New Jersey for your undergraduate experience. I'm wondering, why did you choose Seton Hall?
That's an easy question to answer, honestly. It was all about money. I was going to be a commuter, and it was close to home. And my mom and dad were like, listen, if you want to go on to graduate work, that's on you. You're going to pay for that. So we'll pay for college. And I had a job that I worked at a local hospital. I was making a good deal of money at that time. I was actually making, at that time, I was making $18 an hour, which is going back several years. I mean, this is going back to 1981, 82. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I was going to keep that job working at the hospital, and I would work there, when I had an opportunity. And they were very flexible with my schedule at school. So, it all worked out. And I really enjoyed the experience there. As much as I hated being a commuter, that really did suck, I have to say.
Nice.
You didn't have the whole college experience when you were driving to class every day and then leaving at the end of the day. It wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like we grew up in the same family. My dad, I lived in New York, in the New York City area, and my dad said, yeah, you're doing some in-state tuition. We're going to be looking at the SUNY schools. So it looks like SUNY Buffalo is where you're going. It was strictly economics. I mean, it was the only conversation that was happening in this household is what could we reasonably afford, and it turned out all right, so everything is fine.
Yeah. Well, I was one of 6 kids, and I was the end. They kind of were like, listen, you're the last of six. So, we'll do what we got to do, but that's it. The bare
Yes.
minimum. We're
They
done
were
with you.
tapped out at that point. At that point,
Exactly.
they're like, we're done.
Yes, exactly.
And of course, you went on to law school after that. I'm wondering what made you decide that you wanted to start this career in the field of law?
Well, that's another crazy question with an answer that's a little hard to believe. But I actually wanted to be a lawyer in high school. I just spoke at my high school just last week on career day at Mars Catholic High School in Denville, New Jersey, where I went to high school. And I told them that I really had, I guess, a feeling my senior year I wanted to be a lawyer. And I don't know where that all came from. I mean, I had a family member, an uncle that was an attorney, and just a fascination with the law, maybe the criminal justice process even then. But I decided I wanted to go to law school in high school. And then in college, I was really like pursuing that at Seton Hall University. And I majored in political science, and I took other courses, and I actually had a minor in legal history. And it really was the development of our law system that we have in the United States, which was a carryover from English common law. So I learned a lot about the history of our law and how we adopted our constitution and things of that nature. So it was really interesting. And then the next step was obviously to go to law school. And there was something called the LSATs. It was a standardized test that you had to take, and you had to score pretty well. And they would compare that or take that in combination with your GPA. And my grade point average was really decent at Seton Hall. I think I had like a 3.4, 3.5, something like that, which was respectable. And but I could not do well on the LSATs. I just did horrible. Actually, I talk about it in my book. I took it 3 times, and each time I did worse. So I am not a big proponent of standardized testing. Maybe because I just did so horrible on them. I did terrible on my SATs as well, but that was kind of a big barrier. So I got into DePaul Law School in Chicago. I got into Ohio Northern, which was in Ada, Ohio.
Mhm.
I did not get into my alma mater. I did not get into Seton Hall Law School, which is an irony because I'm a professor there now and I teach. So it's funny how the world turns. But I got waitlisted at University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, and it was very, I don't know, by chance I happened to be calling there. I was really they had me accepted in the spring semester, but I wanted to go right away. I was determined to go in the fall of 1985, which I graduated college in 85. And I got on the phone, I would call. And one day, just by chance, I happened to get the dean of admissions on the phone. It was a weird thing. And he said, you know what, you're interested. Why don't you come on up here? And he interviewed me on a Friday afternoon. And he asked me to bring my college thesis, which was the United States Catholic Conference as a political entity. And I talked about me going down to DC and spending a day with the lobbyists. He was fascinated by the topic. He didn't really understand that the Catholic faith, that they would be so driven towards legislation. I said, well, there's so much legislation out there. And we had a whole interesting conversation. And by the end of the conversation, he said, listen, I don't know why you can't start. You could start. He said, I don't have any problem with you starting here in the fall semester. And I said, okay. And I was walking out the door. He said, we start Monday. You got to get your dorm room and you got to get your books. And I was like, are you kidding? And he's like, no, you got to do it. And that's exactly what I did. And that's how it all started.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I mean, I think that's just a message of perseverance. If you really want something, just go after there and get
Well,
it.
it continued on. Even my law school experience, my class in criminal law, I was taught by Manhattan DA. She was a new professor, and it was an open book exam. So I thought, I'm going to ice this thing. It's easy, open book. I really didn't know the whole process of taking a law school exam, and I ended up with a D plus, which is not a good thing for somebody that wants to pursue a career in criminal law. And the irony of that is, I took a class with that same professor in my third year of law school, which was my last year, and it was on criminal procedure, and I got the highest grade in the class.
There you
So
go.
it was just, I don't know, a twist of fate, every which way you turn. So I was fortunate and blessed in many ways.
Yes, very fortunate and very blessed. No question about that. And ultimately, you became the chief assistant prosecutor, the head of sex crimes and child abuse, vehicular homicide. Those are extremely difficult cases to work. There's
They
no question
were.
about that. So, how do you maintain a positive outlook in your life despite working on these cases where you're seeing some of the worst of humanity?
You know what? That's really, and I never looked at that way, but I learned to deal with tragedy and death, and it was really, not something anybody should have to deal with, especially in their lifetime. And it really changed my view on so much about humanity. But I got to know these families and the victims that were affected by these cases, and it really became almost personal, to want to do justice for these people or their families if they were, their child was deceased or killed in a vehicular homicide accident, or I never say accident, but a tragedy. Accident was certainly preventable and predictable that would happen.
Mhm.
But I got to know these people, and to this day, I still reach out and speak to some of them, and we developed a bond or connection. And it was really about me representing their interest and also representing the interests of the state, making sure that justice was done and that justice was served. And I don't know, I just had a weird way of processing, and it somehow it worked out. And I carried that through into my criminal defense work later, my later years.
Mhm. So, talk about that. How do you make the transition from going from assistant prosecutor to a seasoned criminal defense lawyer where now you're representing the accused?
That is a real twist of fate. And I can tell you, it was one case that turned everything. And, that's why I wrote this book, was really, there were so many fascinating stories and interesting situations that I was in. I had prosecuted a driver that was driving drunk and killed a mom of three. And I got to know her husband extremely well. He was an attorney, and he was instrumental and single-handedly changed the laws in New Jersey to the laws that exist today, where you have to get mandatory prison time for killing someone driving drunk, being charged with vehicular homicide. At the time, that did not exist, but I got to know him pretty well. We prosecuted the driver under traditional laws that existed at the time, but we indicted, which means that you went for the highest degree probable cause to get a determination for aggravated manslaughter, which carried 20 years in state prison if you were convicted, because of the extreme reckless conduct of this driver. He was driving more than 85 miles an hour. He was blowing through red lights. He drove on the median, drove on the shoulder. He was passing people. There were so many witnesses in that case that came forward and said he was basically a time bomb, and he was ready to explode. And the explosion was when he hit the car driven by this mom. And so I got involved talking to the dad, working with him over the process of this trial. The driver was ultimately prosecuted for aggravated manslaughter, sentenced to 20 years, which was a landmark decision in Morris County to have somebody charged with that degree of a crime and sentenced to that extreme. I got to know the husband. He started a foundation speaking to high school students about the dangers of drinking and driving and drug and alcohol awareness. And tragically, he was killed himself. He was hit while he was jogging one day. And I left my job at the prosecutor's office and I took his place on the board. And that was in 1997. So I accepted his role as the speaker for the board. And I spoke to about 75,000 high school students over a period of 2 years, speaking about the mission of the foundation and about the case involving his wife. And that's how I left the prosecutor's office and made the transition to become a defense attorney.
Hmm. That is just a fascinating story. Really, really interesting stuff. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about that is just very relevant, I think, in the news right now. Just this morning, I saw that the president is going after various judges. I guess they have a different opinion than he does, and he basically wants to get rid of these judges. And you wrote the book Unequal Justice. I guess the question for you, and you're the perfect person to ask this question, do you believe that the scales of justice are truly balanced?
From my experience, I would say no. I did not feel that way, and I felt and I would never admit this as a prosecutor. Is I felt like everything was on my side. Even if you look at the layout in the courtroom, the counsel tables are positioned where the prosecutor is next to the jury, right next to the jury.
Mhm.
So that's an advantage in and of itself. And I always viewed my position as being a prosecutor as an advantage, because I could talk to jurors like, hey, I'm one of you. You're paying my salary. I'm here to do the job that you would want me to do. And you know what? It was easy to convince them of that. When I moved over to the other side, to counsel table on the defense, it was very different. I felt that the judges, the same judges I might have appeared in front of as a prosecutor, were very different. And I was treated very differently, and my clients were treated very differently as a defense attorney. And I started to see in my mind, in my eyes, that, hey, this is not really fair. Like, I don't think this is a fair fight. I've got to fight the judge and I've got to fight the prosecutor. It's 2 against 1 every time I'm coming to court. And then the fighter in me, that was like my passion. I was like, okay, I know I'm the underdog. I'm going to fight even harder. And, I'm going to make sure this person gets their day in court, and they're represented, and they have zealous advocacy. They have passionate representation. And I prided myself on that in my career, is becoming involved with these people and getting to know them as people, as human beings, and we all make mistakes, and hopefully we never kill anybody. That's, or get involved in a situation where, there's a sexual assault. But I felt these people deserve their day in court, and their rights needed to be protected.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness that people like you are around to make sure that their rights are protected. I think that is really a bedrock of our judicial system, right? Innocent until proven guilty. And, I do want to talk a little bit about that Timothy Piazza case, because we talk about it pretty often on this podcast. I've written my dissertation on the early warning signs of hazing in college fraternities and sororities. So I'm wondering, how were you involved in that Timothy Piazza case?
Yeah, and it's such an important message, really, to get that out there to universities and to potential new students, that are coming in. I know Jim Piazza, the dad. He and I actually served on a board, DARE of New Jersey, together. And after the incident had happened with Tim, I reached out to him and I said, look, if I can help, and I have done a lot of pro bono work representing crime victims through the years. I mean, some really horrible situations involving, a young lady that came to Seton Hall undergrad to play basketball, and she was murdered at a frat party, and she was gunned down. And I helped the family through the criminal process in the prosecution of the killer. That was one case, and I was involved in another case where a brother and sister were killed by a drunk driver, and helping the family to get justice for their children who were both taken away from them. And so I was involved in a lot of cases representing crime victims. Those are 2 big examples. So I reached out to Jim and I said, if there's anything I can do, even if you need any advice, or I can sit with you, in the courtroom, whatever, I'm willing to do that, and I'm happy to do that because of what you've gone through, and nobody should go through that. No parent should ever have to endure this type of situation. And he was gracious enough to say, look, I appreciate the offer. Let's meet. I'd love to talk to you. So I gave him the benefit of my experience as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. And in that case, the fraternity brothers were all being prosecuted because they basically had ignored the telltale signs that he was suffering, and he could have been saved and should have been saved.
Yeah.
So we talked about that, and we talked about the system. And so I developed an interest, obviously, in trying to help him. And I always offered to be there, available to him. And he, at one point, let me know that he was in good hands. He had a good, capable attorney. But he had started a foundation on behalf of Tim, and they had golf outings they do every year. And I've been, involved in that from day one since they started that. And I go to their golf outing every year. So we've developed, a friendship over the years. We knew each other on the board, but not really knew each other because we had a lot of people on the board. We'd see each other at board meetings, but that's kind of how I got involved. And the more I knew about the story, the more appalled I was. It was just such a horrible situation. And there's actually an A&E show on it, I believe, The Greek Life. And I happened to watch that. And I also listened to a podcast that Melissa Rivers does. I don't know the name of her podcast, but she had Jim and Evelyn on as guests, and they talked about the case. So I applaud them and what they're doing, and the legislation that was just recently passed. They've been really, really committed to this, and I just give them so much credit that they can, you know, rise above everything that's happened, and they're trying to help other people.
Yeah, I don't think we would have a federal law now, the Stop Campus Hazing Act, without the Piazzas and various other families that have been advocating for better laws in this country. So I really do credit Jim and his wife for all of the efforts that they've been putting in to make that happen. So I'm very gracious for the work that they've put in. I think it's huge. And you know, you're absolutely right too about the warning signs that the students should have seen with Timothy Piazza that they ignored and willfully looked the other way. And he should have lived. He really should have had the
Absolutely.
students done the right thing. But I think the students in that case, and then also the students in the case of Caleb Wilson, who died last week at Southern University, same thing. It's like I'm just wondering, like, why are the students so concerned with covering their tracks? In the case of Caleb Wilson, they actually changed his clothing.
Oh my
And
God.
you know, and they're basically covering their tracks, making up a story that Caleb Wilson just passed out playing basketball when they knew full well that they were punching him in the chest 4 times in a warehouse. And then they changed him on the way to the hospital and then came up with this cockamamie story. Like, just, you know, go and get help. And maybe these students are still going to be here with us today. It's a lot easier to work through these issues when they're still alive. When they're no longer here on this earth, there's nothing that we can do to bring them back.
That's right. That's right. And you know, and the same thing with the Piazza case is a young man tried to come forward and they bullied him and badgered him to the point where, you know, he went away. You
Yeah.
know, he should have called the police. Maybe he should have called the police and said, "Hey, you know, you got to get there. This is happening." You know, it only takes one person, really, one person to say, "You know what? I'm not going to be part of this. I'm going to stand and I'm going to make sure that someone, you know, knows about what's happening here." And there's that strength, that power of the fraternity somehow takes, you know, control. And you know, I just have a hard time accepting that.
Yeah, that's the problem that we have with the law. We got to figure out how do we protect students from retaliation, because that is certainly one thing I think that was in his mind at the time. And how do we help organizations that admit that they have a hazing problem, that are looking to remove any of the hazers from their organization? How do we protect those organizations? So
Right.
we have to somehow enable students to come forward and to blow the whistle before anybody gets hurt. And I don't know that we're there yet. And then in my research dissertation, there were certainly some unexpected findings too, where the universities were essentially circumventing the law, and they're supposed to be reporting those incidents of hazing behaviors on their website. And in this particular case, the university had hired an external hazing prevention expert and were sending the students to this external expert and hoping and praying that they would resolve the issue. But the university had no window into whether or not that hazing issue was resolved because it was external. And now, what didn't happen? It never made it onto the website, which is what the law requires. So they're circumventing the law.
Yeah.
And it's just we got to get a handle on this, and we got to, you know, really come up with ways to promote students to come forward. I think is
Absolutely.
really the
And,
bottom
you
line.
know, it's interesting, this whole concept of reporting. I actually, early on in my career, as a legislative aide for one of our state senators in New Jersey. And I was drafting some legislation, some proposed legislation. It was really a Good Samaritan Act. And it was designed to protect, you know, if people were, young people, anybody together, and they were doing drugs and somebody OD'd, they could call the police. Well, previously, that person that called the police could be prosecuted, you know, for supplying or allowing the use of this drug, you know, so they had a hesitancy to do that. Well, it all changed when John Bon Jovi's daughter went away to college. And I believe she was going to school in New York. I don't know what school, but it happened to his daughter where someone actually rendered assistance. They called the police and she was saved. I believe she was saved. And he got on board with this legislation. I had only done draft forms of it. It wasn't actually pushed through the state Senate. Someone else had taken that over. and it got passed into law. So there's a Good Samaritan law, which is really what they need to do with the fraternity issue as well, is that you have to have some immunity, protections of the law if you report. And I don't know why that isn't. I mean, it should be so basic, quite frankly.
I agree with you. It's so basic and that needs to happen 100%. And some of these universities don't even really have a hazing policy in their student code of conduct. And I'm like, what? How
Yeah.
could you not have that, in your student code of conduct? And when I say a policy, it's got to be number one, a definition. Number two, you got to explain to me how the university is going to adjudicate this issue, right? What is the investigation process like? What is the adjudication process like? And then number three, tell me in the student code of conduct how I, as a student, can report any hazing activity that's happening. Those are kind of those three pieces that need to be a part of the student code of conduct. And I'm telling you right now, not every university has that, which
No.
is like mind blowing to me.
Well, the colleges all have like the laws unto themselves. They have their own like adjudicatory body. You know, I've been involved in some cases where young men have been accused of rapes of girls, or and it's such a shoddy investigation. And there's really a denial of some of your fundamental rights when it comes to being represented and having someone speak on your behalf. And I don't think it affords the due process. And then they involve the actual system. Let's say the police become involved in the system, and then you're fighting an uphill battle with the university. And I've handled a couple of those cases, so I can talk from experience where we've had to do our own independent investigation and find out that the stories weren't quite what they were concocted to be. And I was never about, bashing the victim in the case, but these were clearly concocted stories with some ulterior motives. And both of these young men, the universities dropped the charges against them. And, I can speak. One was Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, and the other was, I believe, Marist. Mm-hmm. And both those young men were I'll say acquitted. They were not responsible for what was alleged to have occurred. So thankfully, they were able to continue and get their degrees and move on from their college careers.
Mm-hmm. Is that a similar story? I know you had some potential involvement with the Duke Lacrosse case. Is that kind of what happened in that case? And what are the implications of that Duke Lacrosse case?
Well, that was very different. I was in defense practice, and I left the prosecutor's office as head of sex crimes and child abuse. And then I was doing defense work, and I was taking on some kind of big cases in that area, mm-hmm. sex crimes. And I had represented a priest, for instance, charged with sexual assault. That was one of my first cases coming out of the prosecutor's office. I was brought in as co-counsel and ended up taking over the case. And then I got into some other cases that got some press. And so what happened was one of the Duke Lacrosse players was from our area, from New Jersey. He went to Del Barton High School, and his mom or dad had reached out to me. I think it was the dad, and said, "Hey, I got your name from someone. Would you be willing to take on this case?" And I knew a little bit about the allegations involving this fraternity supposedly raping this prostitute, at a party. And I just felt in my heart, like, as much as I wanted to help, and it was obviously a big case, it was a lot of national publicity, and I just felt I was not the best person to be handling that case, because I didn't really know the lay of the land, so to speak. I didn't know the law in North Carolina. I wasn't, admitted in North Carolina. I would have had to have gotten what's called pro hoc vici, which another attorney has to certify and endorse you to become an attorney and handle that case in the state. So I think I referred them, or said, you would better serve by finding someone else. Well, fast forward just recently, I think two months ago, this woman, the prostitute who made these allegations against all these players, I think there were 11 of them altogether, mm-hmm. Admitted that she had fabricated and made up the whole story. And she's now serving a sentence for a homicide that she committed. And she decided she was going to have this come to Jesus moment where she would, bare her soul and say, "Hey, I made that whole thing up." But she ruined the lives of all those young men who, I believe, were expelled from the school and kicked off the lacrosse team, and really ruined their lives in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that kind of brings me to, this final question, which is kind of this grandiose question that, you can go multiple ways with, but what is the cost of justice?
That's a fantastic question. And there is a price. There is a price. When you're a private attorney, I can explain a little bit of the law of the land. And when someone comes to you, they pay you a retainer.
Right.
They give you a fee, and you may base your retainer on the stages of the proceeding. They say, okay, this is how much here, this is how much here, and this is how much here. And then if it goes to trial, this is how much it's going to cost you. So you have to put a dollar amount on your time. You have to evaluate where you're going to be at a certain point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, quite frankly, they just ran out of money. They'd say, I want to go to trial. I want to go to trial. I want to go to trial. I want to have my day in court where I want to confront my accusers, which is your constitutional right. It's your constitutional right to have a jury trial. But I'm an attorney that's running a business. You've given me so much money. Now that money's gone. It's consumed. What do I do? Do I keep on in the case? Well, I guess I could if I just want to stay on as an advocate pro bono, which means for free. Well, I can't do that at the sake of other clients that are actually paying me money. That wouldn't be fair to them.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, towards the latter part of my career, I was making more and more applications to courts to be relieved as counsel because I wasn't being paid. Clients were running out of money. So there is a cost to justice. And especially if you have a private attorney, there's a cost. And at some point, people say uncle, and they break the bank. And from my experience, I dealt a lot with the prosecutor's office that I once worked in, and I was the head of sex crimes and child abuse and vehicular homicide. So I would say that I was a worthy adversary, or I was a pain in their ass, because I would put them to the test or challenge them on cases. When I had an assistant prosecutor on a case, I would say to them, look, I appreciate what you're doing. I did it myself. But you need to know your file. You need to know your evidence. And I quite frankly see some problems here. So they didn't want to have that conversation with me. And ultimately, the system would allow for them meaning the state, to bring me back to court multiple times unnecessarily. Nothing would be happening with the case. We go to court. They hadn't turned over police reports. They hadn't interviewed a witness. They weren't ready to move forward. They needed to do this. They needed to do that. And the judges would allow that. The judges would say, okay, we'll see you in a month. We'll see you in a month. We'll see you in a month. Well, wait a minute. If somebody's in custody, that month is like an eternity.
Yeah.
If that's your kid, if that's my kid, if that's your family member, your brother, your sister, they want their day in court and they deserve that. Well, I had one case where I think I appeared 18 times, and nothing was happening. And I would say, Judge, this is ridiculous. What are we doing here? This is not working out. We got to get our day in court. When are we going to pick a jury? Let's pick a jury. And back in the earlier days when I was a prosecutor, it was much easier to pick a jury. You didn't have to block out, a month in advance, a panel of jurors to come in and get 100 people to question as to whether or not they're going to be selected as potential jurors in the case. Now it's so much more complicated. They had to block out all this time. So, I hate to say it, but more and more in recent years, I had to make those applications to be relieved as counsel. And I'd say to my clients, I'm so sorry. I can't continue on in your case. I'm not being paid, and I've got an office to run. I got staff to pay. I've got to pay overhead. I got to pay for my rent, and I just couldn't afford to continue on in those cases. And some of them were very big cases. And as much as I hated to walk away, and, it happened more and more. And one case in particular that comes to my mind right off the top of my head, it's a guy was accused of raping a prostitute and stealing from her. And I told him, I said, look, I can't continue on your case. You owe me a lot of money. And I'm just staying in this case because I'm hoping at some point cooler heads are going to prevail. I had sent a proposal to the prosecutor about trying to resolve the case, and they basically rejected it out of hand. And so I filed a motion to be relieved, and we went into court, and I had served him with the motion. I explained it to him. I met with him in the jail. I talked to him. I said, I'm so sorry I got to do this, but I got to get out of your case. I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I see your case going to trial probably 6-7 months from now. And he said, I completely understand. So we went in front of the judge, and the judge was mad at me for making the motion to be relieved as his attorney, because we were moving along and we were getting closer and closer to trial. So the judge looked over at to him and said, hey, what do you think of your attorney filing this motion to get out of your case? And to his credit, he looked over at me and he looked at the judge and he said, well, the last time I checked, he ain't working for free.
Wow.
And with that, the judge signed the order. I was out of the case.
Wow.
And wouldn't you know that guy went to trial, and the proposal I sent in writing to the prosecutor, all the other charges that I said were going to be dismissed were dismissed, and he was found guilty of a gun charge, and that's what he was sentenced on.
Ooh.
So, you know, I don't ever pat myself on the back, but I think through my experience, I learned a little bit, just a little bit.
Oh, yeah. No question about it. Well, you've definitely outlined for us what is the cost of justice. And yeah, I mean, that is the problem with the system, right? Some good cases didn't go forward just because of economics and not able to move forward, which is a sad commentary, right? I mean,
yeah, it is. And there's another approach to that is look at the people that unfortunately have been. And I just read the book Framed by John Grisham, which is an interesting, fascinating book. But there's so much of that goes on where people are wrongfully arrested and convicted and sentenced, and they're sitting in jail. And clearly, the prosecutors engaged in misconduct, hiding evidence, not revealing it, or the court is complicit in that, and they allow for it to go on. And that should not be happening in our system. I just have a real fundamental problem with that. I'm a firm believer that the system has to work for everybody, and it has to be fair, and it has to be equal. And I can't say that truly happens in every case.
Unbelievable. All right, well, go and pick up James' book. It's called Unequal Justice, The Search for Truth to Balance the Scales. Author is James M. Porfido. This has been really, really helpful. Now, you know, I do love good food, and I get the sense that you like to have some good food as well. And New Jersey has some of the best Italian food on planet Earth. Okay, and I'm missing it. I live in Nashville, Tennessee now, and I don't even know what good Italian food is around here. You certainly can't find it. I got to go back to New York and New Jersey to get it. So the next time I'm in Denville, New Jersey, where should I be going for a great bite to eat?
Wow, I don't know. Denville's a tough one. Denville's tough. There is a restaurant, Casa Bella, that's been there forever and ever, and they have great Italian food.
Yeah.
I don't mean I'm giving them a plug, but I'm closer in Somerset County. There's a couple of restaurants in Morristown where my office used to be.
Yeah.
You know, there's MV in Bernardsville, which is a great Italian restaurant. They're actually from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So they came to Bernardsville, and they have a restaurant there. There's Bistro 73, which is in Bernardsville, which is a wonderful restaurant. I love. They have a rigatoni with short rib sauce, which is amazing. And there's so many. Caniglio's in Morristown is a great pizza place, and Millie's Meatballs in Morristown. There's so many places to eat. You know, I am definitely an Italian food aficionado. I love Italian food. That's obviously my background. But when they can mimic my grandmother's cooking or my mom's cooking, that's pretty darn good.
That's pretty darn good. You're willing to pay for that.
Yeah. Any price.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you do have some great restaurants close by you, so I'm definitely jealous of the great Italian food you get to go and enjoy. I wish I had even a fraction of the restaurants that you can go to right now. So anyway, so I'll be jealous and I'll come visit for sure. All right, so for our listeners, if they want to pick up your book, perhaps they need some legal services, where should they go to connect with you?
Well, it's easy. I mean, you can just Google me, obviously. That's the easiest thing. My name, James M. Porfido. You'll find me. I'm very easy to find. I have a website, www.porfidolaw.com, which will actually take you to the firm that I'm affiliated with now, which is Einhorn, Barbarito, and a whole lot of other names that follow. Botwinick, Frost, Nunn, and Lasmano. And we're in Denville, actually, and we have about 50 attorneys. But it'll take you to that website. But there's also an unequal-justice.com website. which talks about the book and about my background a little bit. But I'm easy to find, very easy to find.
Fantastic. Just Google him. It's James M. Porfido, Porfido. Just Google him. You'll find his LinkedIn account. You'll find everything that he does. You'll find the book, etc. Go and get all of the stuff because I tell you what, this guy has lived a very interesting life and there's so much more to do. So thank you for spending time with us today, James. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure, Dr. Mike.
Yes, it's an honor. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with James, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with others. Thank you so much for being here today. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.